And here we are. Episode,
25.
is it really? Episode
Yeah, 25.
25. Oh my
Mm-hmm.
gosh. That's
One
great.
quarter of 100. Mhm.
Yes, we've just been spending a bit of time before the meeting there, coordinating a few different things, and I've got the New Zealand trip coming up for the men's summit in New Zealand, and I see my 23 coming up in India, and we were just making sure that we'd have how our episodes, our future episodes, would be able to coordinate with those events.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think this sounds good right now. I know we had audio issues last time, but everybody just let me know if Rob just sounds better, if he's like a better sounding person here.
I've actually switched headphones, and so far it sounds. I think it sounds better for Vernon, which is a good sign.
Yeah, yeah, much better. Yeah.
And Vernon, I think you had something you wanted to discuss to start with.
Yes, we were not able to fit it in last time.
That's right.
So I don't remember exactly what's instigated this, but I think it was a myriad of things. So I wanted to talk about automation, right? So
Mm.
we talk about men a lot. Now this is a kind of like a bit of a nitpick, a critique of our own movement here, because when they talk about men, they talk about how they've, you know, put the toil and work into civilization and such like that. It's that their labor is what makes men so needed, right?
Mm. Hmm.
But I would argue mostly that men have been working more towards mitigating that labor. Like it's sort of a paradox, but I don't like to say paradox like it's some kind of weird loop, but rather an interesting process. I think uh, men's labor goes into making the labor less tomorrow. Does that make sense? Kind of like
Yes.
yeah, we put in tech, work in technology and make things more automated and make things easier for them and others.
Yes, I think there's probably both aspects that men have put in a lot of physical labour as well over since as long as there have been humans, but at the same time, the words work smarter, not harder come to mind, and men are responsible for a large amount of automation and a large amount of time and labour saving devices, including many in the home.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you're on the right track there.
Yeah, sure. Because the way I see it is that labor is done in a certain way until somebody has the bright idea to make it a bit easier. Of
Mm.
course, there are obstacles, of course, like those who want to still enforce the old way of doing probably kind of get something out of all these men toiling. But of course, um, the better way to do it is a in effect a liberating kind of sort of like it's like a that's the kind of masculinity I want to really uh, uphold instead of just the toil, just being beasts of burden, you know.
Yes,
So
absolutely. Telling men to get back on the plantation.
exactly
That's
right,
right.
but
That's right.
too many do that, and I'm kind of cringing when women in the men's movement do that too, because
Mm.
it's like one thing that really bugs me is we need men. Okay, are you going to be as compassionate about us if they were not needed in that way, right?
Yep.
So if we don't need them, do you dispose of us? That's the it's I just don't like the way that the question is just thrown around, you
Yep.
know.
This is the first time we've actually talked about this, but I've actually thought along similar lines, and statements like, and so I'm very careful when I do talk about this to make it clear I'm not talking about men being effectively seen as beasts of burden. If society certainly needs men, right? But because there are right now, for example, irrespective of anything else, there are thousands of jobs where the which are overwhelmingly only men have only had the skills necessary. If a Y chromosome killing virus came through society tomorrow and wiped out almost all men, there wouldn't be enough mechanics or refrigeration mechanics or all sorts of other jobs. So there's that practical aspect of it that if all men got sick, the few women who had the skills wouldn't be enough to maintain all the infrastructure, and they'd probably be needed to try to train other women, assuming they could even find enough women to do those jobs. So there's that aspect of it, uh, but I always emphasize the individual choice of the men. To Men are choosing to do those jobs, and that's fine if that's what they feel they want to do, and they find that's rewarding, and it gets them where they need to be. But we should never be compelling men to do that.
Right. Yeah. And another thing I want to emphasize is, men's mental labor instead of just physical,
Mm-hmm.
because we're taking advantage and for granted just about everything. Just about everything we do right now in our life is done with software.
Mm.
You know,
And it's
we're
increasingly so.
yeah, right. Because
Mm.
we're doing this by software. This is us. We could say that this is just a technology advanced version of passing letters across the country.
Yeah.
But even passing letters across the country is just a advanced way of just trying to talk to somebody else elsewhere, where you would have just probably like ran or sent a messenger or something like that. Even sending a messenger is a technology advanced version of just going in and doing it yourself.
I read about say 19th century polite society, if you like, not necessarily aristocracy, but wealthy people, and particularly the women who were not having to work. And it was very, very common in the late 19th century, early 20th century, for these women who had often had staff in the house to be constantly passing notes backwards and forwards to their friends all day long. And it might have been slower, but it really bears a lot of resemblance to social media. So, or more in probably individual messaging,
Right, yeah.
but nevertheless, it was still there. The technology wasn't there, but they were still finding a way to do it.
Exactly, yeah.
It was just
And
slower.
people complain about people being on their phones all day, like just being on their phones on public like that. But it used to be that people were burying their faces in newspapers.
Yeah, there's actually a photo. I don't know if you've ever seen it, from the 1950s, and it's got a carriage full of people on I think, an American train,
Yeah,
and they've all got their faces buried in the newspaper. It's
right,
fabulous.
right. It's like the more things change, the more they stay the same.
Yeah.
So I think we're freaking out over nothing. You know? Yeah.
In
Now,
some ways, absolutely. It's
in some
that's
ways, yeah,
right.
sure, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
Now,
That's
what
right.
I don't like is that parents let their kids just be on their tablets all day long or something like that. I think that's a little bit of a more recent thing, but then again, based on what we talked about, maybe there's some aspects that are wrong about that. So
I've personally never been that concerned about it, partly for the types of arguments we're
mhm,
putting forward here. I'm, of course, a parent.
yeah,
This is the world in which the next generation are going to have to deal with. My daughter has never known a time without broadband, so there's always been fast internet into the home. She was probably about 8 or so before sort of 3G, I guess. So, probably a little bit younger, actually. No, she was younger, actually, about 3 or 4, when 3G started to really take off. So mobile broadband is not something that she knew her entire life, but almost. So she's lived with ubiquitous internet, and that's the world she's going to have to live in. So I guess my thought on it is that this is the world they're going to have to deal with. So they need to kind of better if they deal with it now and get used to it. And things like internet addiction are a serious problem,
I get
and
it.
I think it's something. Yeah, and I think it's something I suffered with when I was younger, to be honest. But if it's going to happen, better to address it early, I think.
Exactly, yeah. So let's talk something similar along those lines, like kind of growing up in the technological age that you're growing up in.
Mm.
So obviously you're much older than myself. So um so I'm just kind of comparing the kids today to when I was a kid. So
Mhm.
when I was growing up, my in my place, my dad had this kind of entire wall of VHS tapes, right? It was
Mhm.
at the time it was something to see, right? It's just this wonderful collection of VHSs, and he had all these cassette tapes of music that I thought I was going to inherit, you know. But now, not only did I surpass him in terms of CDs, but we're past the physical now. We've got
Yeah.
you know unspeakable amounts of music digitally in our computers, and
So this actually comes up to a point that I wanted to I thought about mentioning this a little earlier, and it was sort of we've come back to it actually, which is convenient. I don't know. Have you ever come across the term a Carrington event? I don't know if we've ever talked about it, but
that is a very familiar term. I'm trying to pinpoint what exactly that is, but I've heard of a
so
Karen.
oh, I think you dropped out there for a moment, Vernon.
I
Oh,
said
good,
I've
yeah.
heard of a character event.
Nice. So essentially, in the 1860s, there was major solar flare activity, and really things got a bit crazy. The telegraph, the only telecommunications they really had at the time were telegraph stations. Telegraph stations caught fire. Some of the operators disconnected the batteries on their telegraph systems and found they could still operate them, and that's because there were magnetic fields being generated in the wires just by by the the solar flare activity and the magnetic fields being that was causing. So if a an event like this again is called a Carrington event, I think that's named after the gentleman who really nailed
Yeah,
down what the problem was
yeah.
going on.
Richard Christopher Carrington, and
Thank you,
someone else
Christopher
independently.
Carrington.
So
Yep.
yeah.
So if a Carrington event occurred now, it could potentially cripple society, and this is because we've become so dependent on technology. And there's a couple of problems going on. The U.S. military used to harden their equipment because they were worried about EMPs, and there were actually ways they could use germanium silicon hybrids in the chips to make it more resistant. So maybe they'd still lose some equipment, but they wouldn't lose all their equipment and keep operating. But since the end of the Cold War, they've largely abandoned that and gone for cheaper silicon. So even the U.S. military would be susceptible. And I don't think enough a lot of people that know this, but we actually had a near miss on Carrington event in 2012. The Earth only missed one by about 9 days. So I was actually receiving at the time.
Imagine if it didn't miss, and considered a year 2012, everybody would have freaked out.
Yeah, well, this is exactly right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I never thought of that. Actually, that's right. That's and I was on a list where I was getting advanced information on meteorological stuff at the time, and because of something I was involved in, and there was quite a discussion on this at the time, and it was only later that the newspapers really reported on it, but. It really would, even in 2012, would have been crippling, and it would be much more severe now. The US government has previously assessed recovery at 4 to 10 years from an event like that for full recovery of infrastructure. So imagine nearly a decade, perhaps something like a decade-long depression or something like that in perhaps a worst case scenario. So it's really quite serious and potentially serious, and of course talks to our dependence on technology and people being so dependent, younger people being so used to it. They might be in for a rude awakening if we had a problem like that.
Exactly. So I think education on what the technology is supposed to be is crucial, and we got to keep that in mind ourselves, because the whole thing about our dependency on technology is the fact that we treat it like a savior, basically, where it's treated like this source of deliverance. But the problem is, it may seem so, but it's just a better way to do X, right? But we shouldn't forget X, because so this reminds me of a concept called graceful degradation. Do you know that term?
Yes.
Yeah, right. So I think most commonly it's applied to like the software world, but I think we should be able to gracefully to undergo graceful degradation should the need arises. Like,
Absolutely.
sure, like, I love our technology. It's just, I think the most respectful thing we can do to it is know what it is, that if it were to kind of leave us for at least a short time, you'll be able to gracefully revert to older ways, and who knows, maybe go camping.
Both Vernon and I have a background in technology, so and this is an area of concern for me personally. A lot of applications are built assuming that everything will be okay, and are built assuming that the network will be functional. And advice that's been encouraged, people have been encouraged to follow and has largely been ignored, is that assume failure, basically. And there are organizations that do this to some extent. Netflix famously is very, very good at it, actually, although if they were hit by a Carrington event, maybe they would be done too, but or they wouldn't have any customers to deliver to. But they notoriously or famously do actually try to build for failure, and they actually developed a software application you might have heard of, Vernon, called Chaos Monkey. And Chaos Monkey goes around disconnecting things in their network because the argument is they basically have to build for failure, so they might as well have failure all the time. And so Chaos Monkey goes around in a virtual sense, unplugging cables and powering things off and this sort of thing.
Exactly. Right. And we here in Florida know all about gracefully degrading in some way, because hurricanes are part of the course here. Right now, we weren't hit badly at all. We just did this past hurricane, Idalia, or tropical storm rather. But we prepared. We always keep on buying expensive backup equipment, but sometimes it hits us, and sometimes we put and we put it to good use, but sometimes it's just there for the next year.
Yeah. I'm reminded, actually, there was some sort of major event in New York City maybe about 10 years ago. I can't recall what it was. Obviously wasn't a hurricane or anything like that far north, but so I can't recall. Maybe it was a severe ice storm or something like that. But there was famously a building in the city where they had a generator on the roof, and they were and the building power had gone down, and they were trying to keep all their servers running. And the delivery system to get the fuel to the roof, I think, had been interrupted or something, probably because it was dependent on some other power source. And they actually had sysadmins carrying fuel up the stairways to fill the. So these poor sysadmins, some of whom may not, reaching for a stereotype, some of whom may not have been very fit. These poor guys were actually having to carry the fuel up the stairs, up quite a number of floors apparently, and pour the thing in the generator so the servers kept running. So yes, there's a lot of interdependencies there, and a lot of, sometimes the dependencies can be quite subtle, and you may think you've got things covered, and then you discover that in actual fact there was some sort of dependency that you weren't aware of. In this case, I think it was the pumping system, where they thought they were all good, but it wasn't sufficient for their needs, and they had to find a way around it. So these sort of things are unfortunately quite common.
Yeah, right. Just don't take things for granted, and don't assume that the world takes care of you because you deserve it or anything like that.
Absolutely, and don't assume that technology will always be there for you. Yes.
Yeah.
And respect the network. I mean, when I was in the pre-internet era, there was a saying: always respect maps, because there are never enough maps, and maps are hard to construct and so forth.
Sure.
And I still say that from a paper point of view. But in terms of the internet, respect the network, because a lot of people sort of abuse the network quite a lot. And remember that it's this amazing capability which has changed our lives, but it's not completely impenetrable to attack. It can be taken down, and has been taken down from time to time. So,
right, exactly.
So I did have one last point I made while I was. It's probably harkening back a little bit of the earlier discussion when you were talking about automation and manual labor and so forth. I guess I'll probably throw it in. Something I would briefly talk about the topic of slavery. Slavery, of course, is we're talking about automation and manual labor. Of course, a lot of the manual labor throughout history would have been conducted by men, not always, and there were, for example, female slaves employed in other ways. But if you're talking about, say, the salt mines in ancient Rome, it would have been men in there. But something that occurred to me some years ago while I was researching slavery, as I was doing, and I realized that societies decided that slavery was morally objectionable just after automation made it unprofitable. Quite amazing. Yes. So look at the British, look at the industrial. UK was one of the first places in the world to really drive an anti-slavery stance and tried to shut down the Atlantic slave trade and so forth. And they were the first country in the world to industrialize, and it became unprofitable. Yes, and suddenly they realized it was immoral as well.
Exactly. Right. I mean, So I actually questioned whether it is just suddenly finding it immoral, or they always knew it, but they were just kind of turning a blind eye to it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
But there were always some people, and even into ancient times, there were some people who argued that slavery was immoral. But yeah, they were very much in the minority.
hmm
Yeah,
exactly.
no, that's a fair
Yeah,
point. That's right. Probably quietly and privately, people knew this was the case, but there wasn't the impetus to stamp it out. I mean,
exactly.
for the record, it continues today, and there are more people enslaved today than at any point in history. As a proportion of the population, it's much smaller than it was, but the total number, obviously, is about. I think the last figure I heard was about 50 million people are enslaved
Right,
at the moment. So I just wanted to put that in about automation and so forth, and about manual labour. So
right, exactly.
I do have. I don't know if you have anything further to discuss. I do have a couple of
I
other points I wanted to bring up. I'll go.
well, it's kind of brewing in my head. Why don't you start first,
Hmm.
and I think what I want to talk
All right.
about. Yeah.
So I just wanted to mention a few people, actually, a few shout outs to a few men and boys. So gentleman by the name of Daniel Beauvais. Bit of a history geek, but I had never heard of Daniel until quite recently, and I've personally benefited from Daniel's work because Daniel Beauvais invented the antihistamine, and as somebody who had quite a lot of allergies when I was young, I definitely benefited from Daniel's work. Uh, Fantastic that he did this. According to his Wikipedia article, he also believed that smoking made you smarter. So I think we can probably put that one aside. But I think his work on antihistamines absolutely fabulous
Yeah.
and has made many people's lives better.
Right. Yeah. Probably. He might have got that reversed. Like maybe smart people are prone to smoking. Yeah. Maybe.
Maybe that's reversed too. I'm not sure that's even true anymore, but maybe that's
Well,
reversed
maybe not
too.
anymore, but like if you're privy to you're to all the problems of the world, you're more if you're that much more intelligent, the more depressed you are. That's why you smoke. Uh,
Yeah, it could be actually. That's right. That's right. Next person I want to mention is a young boy by the name of Peter Gins. Peter, I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly. His first name was Peter and his surname Ginz. He was Czechoslovakian of Jewish background, and he died in the Holocaust when he was 16. But I just wanted to mention him because I came across him when I was doing some research, and he really was an incredibly intelligent young man. And I suspect it's really quite a tragedy. Obviously, it's always a tragedy, but I think in particularly, I wonder what Peter might have done if he'd been able to live. Yeah, he was interested in literature, history, paintings, geography, as well as technical areas. He actually wrote 5 books. He died at 16. He was murdered at 16. He had already written 5 books. He only one survives. And he actually, for a while, he actually ran along with a number of other boys. He ran a magazine in one of the camps. This camp was called Theresienstadt. For
mhm.
those who don't know, it was the one that the Nazis dressed up, and they actually famously had the Red Cross come through the camp, and because the various countries asked the Red Cross to inspect the camps, and so they had Theresienstadt was already set up to kind of be nicer than the other camps, at least superficially, and they really dressed it up and made it look like it wasn't a bad place to be, and they had educational groups and all sorts of things going on while the Red Cross was going through. Anyway, yeah, Peter was there for a little while and then eventually taken to Auschwitz. But he actually wrote he was the editor of an underground magazine called Vedem, Vedem, while at Theresienstadt. Anyway, just thought I'd mention Peter because I'd really have to wonder what would have happened if he'd had an opportunity to live longer. But I also wanted to mention this newspaper, Vedem, was all boys. That's every source says that I've read says it was just boys, just the boys doing it. So it was boys ranging from about 12 to 16, I think, and they were producing this, and they were doing poems and stories and goings on in Theresienstadt. So yeah, I always say I've got new categories on Wiki for Men: what men do and what boys do.
Right. Awesome.
Yeah. So I don't know if you're happy for me to go on.
Yeah, sure.
All right, no worries. So another thing that's come up recently is that, and I'm going to tell a story about how this actually happened. So there's a woman by the name of Zoe McLellan. Anyone who's been reading A Voice for Men will see that I posted an
Yep.
article on her recently.
Yep. You talked
Uh,
about her last a little bit.
a little bit, thank you. That's right. Yes. So Zoe is currently at large. She's wanted by the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office. If you see Zoe McLellan, please contact your local law enforcement or the LA County District Attorney's Office, as they would be interested to know that. So Zoe McLellan disappeared in 2020. There were some reports that she may some reports say it was a little bit earlier, but she's definitely disappeared by 2020, and she's disappeared with her son Sebastian. Now, Sebastian's father has sole custody of Sebastian, and so obviously, if Zoe McLellan is to be arrested, Sebastian can be returned to his father. Sebastian's now 10. It isn't clear what's going on, whether he is attending school under a false name or whether he's not attending school. Hopefully he's being tutored. From some information I've read has suggested that Zoe had previously kept him in the house quite a lot. So I hope he's really getting the education that he needs.
Yep.
Anyway, what's particularly interesting about this, as you said, talked about it a little bit, but I've had an opportunity to research the topic quite a lot since then. Zoe McLellan is a famous actress. She's been on Star Trek Voyager, and she's been on NCIS New Orleans, and she's been on Designated Survivor, and quite a number of other shows. So I personally remember her from Voyager and Designated Survivor, which I watched. Anyway, so what really amazes me, what I said in the article I posted on A Voice for Men, that her face has been seen by millions. This isn't Joe Public disappearing. It's absolutely stunning that she's still at large after 2 years, and I really think people need to keep an eye out for her and contact the police if you see her. On Wiki for Men, there's on her article there. There's now about 12 or 13 documents that we have been assured by lawyers are publicly available, publicly accessible, and we're able to display those documents. So by all means, have a look there and look at the information that's there, and let's see if maybe somebody has seen Zoe. Then she must be somewhere. Now, there's some question about where she might be. Some sources suggested Canada. She had been working in Canada on Designated Survivor earlier on. Some people thought maybe she might have returned there. She's originally from Washington State, so there's been some suggestion she might have returned there. The best information we have at the moment suggests maybe Louisiana. So she has apparently got wealthy family in Louisiana, and it may be easy for her to hide out there. So again, particularly if you're in one of those areas that I named, particularly if you're in Louisiana, please keep an eye out. She has to be somewhere, and so does Sebastian. Let's get Sebastian back to his father. To me, this is really quite emblematic of this problem. But in this case, if we can catch the person in one case, this ought to be the case.
Mm-hmm. Great. And if by chance you actually are an editor for Wikipedia, put it on, because it's not there.
Thank you for reminding me. Okay, so there's a story behind this. So in 2021, there were, by the way, the media has said very, very little about this. In 2021, TMZ broke the story. TMZ, of course, being an entertainment-focused media outlet.
Yeah.
They broke the story. A couple of other Daily Mail picked it up and did one article. Radar Online did a number of articles. That was all in 2021, and it's gone pretty much silent since. Now, I read these articles and I put it in to Zoe McLellan's Wikipedia article. In March 2023, an editor came along. I don't remember his name right now. If you want to look at his name, it's on the history of the page, the Zoe McLellan page on Wikipedia. And what he did is legitimate in the context of Wikipedia. He removed the information. Although I will say removing so much information without consultation is a bit unusual. I noticed about 3 or 4 weeks ago, this is how this all started. I noticed about 3 or 4 weeks ago, remember it was the information I had originally put in. I have had a Wikipedia account for nearly 20 years. I restored the information, but remember that was 5-6 months after it was removed. Okay, so I restored the information. Within a couple of days, he'd removed it again. Now, one of the rules of Wikipedia is if there's a dispute over whether it should be in or out, the default is out, basically, unless there's some compelling reason to put it in. So me putting it in again won't help because he'd just remove it again. So, and he said it's not well sourced. So I am in the process of gathering information to establish better the sources. I've got pretty much everything we need. And then I'm going to look at getting that information restored, and if possibly, actually put what's called a mediation in place, where other editors come in and try to get some consensus about whether the information should be in or out. The reality is she is wanted on a warrant, and this is, I think, extremely relevant information. We're talking about a public figure here who's disappeared. I think it's absolutely absurd that isn't notable information, and it certainly is properly sourced. So I am working on getting that information back into Wikipedia, but if anyone wants to join me, by all means, please do so.
Right, yeah. If you're a Star Trek watcher like me and probably Robert, the episodes that she was in are 2 episodes, Good Shepherd and The Haunting of Deck 12. She's the Bajoran, right. So she would have had like a wrinkly kind of nose. She didn't play a human, she played a Bajoran.
Exactly.
Right. So and she was on those 2 episodes alone, as far as I can tell. I think it was just those 2.
And the other shows I mentioned, Designated Survivor and NCIS in New Orleans, she had either recurring or regular parts on those. And there were a couple of other shows that I mentioned that I detail in my article as well. Same thing. So I will be mentioning Zoe McLellan regularly, basically at this point. So there was a Roman senator by the name of Cato the Elder. Now, unless you're a history geek like me, many people may not know that, but he was famous for ending all of his speeches, regardless of the topic, with the words Carthago delenda est, which means Carthage must be destroyed. I will be ending all of my presentations with a mention of Zoe McLellan until she's brought back into custody. Until she's brought into custody. We need people to know this. As I said, it's emblematic to me. If we can there are plenty of people who disappear with kids. They abduct their own children, and they're very hard to catch because they're not in the public eye. But she's in the public eye. We should be able to find her.
Yeah.
Justice needs to be done.
Makes sense to me.
Yeah. So now, having said that, I did want to. Oh, did you want to? Did you want to cover anything before I move on to the next item I have?
Yeah, and just now remembering exactly what I was wanting to talk about. So it has a little bit to do with the automation thing. It kind of ties into it, but it doesn't directly have anything to do with it. I want to ask the question, why men work? Why do they build civilization? So
it's a very interesting question.
I'm guessing that, your run-of-the-mill natural gynocentric types, even in our own movement, would probably say because it serves and impresses women, right?
Mm-hmm.
I say no. I say that men love their craft and they care about their work. Like they love doing amazing things. Like the fact that they impress and serve women is incidental.
So we've never talked about this topic, but I've come to a similar conclusion, actually, that I think most men, not all men obviously, but most men get, a lot of self-satisfaction from achieving in an area and mastering an area like this, and I think you do see that with we know, for example, women tend to maintain a better work-life balance. Men tend to focus a lot more on and spend a lot of time on work, and I do think that a lot of that time they're trying to master what they're doing, and they get a lot of satisfaction once they do master it. And that's certainly how I feel about areas I've mastered and spent a lot of time on. Something I'll actually get to in a moment, as a topic I want to talk about.
Yeah, sure.
So yes,
And
I think we've come to the same conclusion independently.
exactly, yeah. And and the opposite of doing something for its own sake, which I think is a really true masculine virtue, by the way.
Mm.
The opposite of that, of course, is the argument that the motive is gynocentric, right? That we do work gynocentrically. But I say that instead of that being why civilization exists, I think it's how civilization gets destroyed, because gynocentrism, or at least the motive, that being the motive to do anything, is more akin to keeping up appearances, kind of keeping up the appearance that they are confident. You're trying to impress, so you cut corners, you bypass things, and you essentially come up with bullshit, and then if everybody did that, society would totally collapse.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really interesting point, actually. Yeah, I mean, men do attract women as in they master a subject, which makes them more successful in life, which ultimately will cause them to attract a wife or a woman, and then eventually be able to reproduce. But yeah, the question, I guess, is as you say, the gynocentrists would tend to argue that's the key reason rather than being a byproduct of it. And yes, as I said, I've tended to come to a similar conclusion.
Mm-hmm. Right. Like in any given thing, like be it the functionality and infrastructure of society or the arts, and I obviously classify music as the arts. If you're just trying to be a rock star to impress women, you're gonna come up with subpar crap. But in my opinion, the best music has been stuff done purely for its own sake. Maybe it'll incidentally become successful, and good for them. But
the people who love it, the people who really love it, are going to put the time in. That's right.
Right. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So, I mean, it relates to, men, I think, probably do have, like, it can be a double-edged sword, because it's along the lines of, and I've used this reference for Stoicism before. It can take men to greatness, but at the same time, it can also potentially be destructive in some ways, in that some people, of course, some men will overdo it, become workaholics. And at that point, it becomes a problem. But I don't think you can separate the two, unfortunately. And same with Stoicism, where I've made this exact point. But Stoicism is sometimes referred to as as a characteristic of or a component of toxic masculinity, whereas my argument is it's a double-edged sword. It leads men to greatness, but can also, in some cases, harm them. So. And I don't know if you can separate those two things. Probably the same thing with the love of working. I'm not sure that you can separate the two. Most men will achieve greatness because of it, or will master a topic, but there'll be some men who'll push it too far.
Exactly. Yeah. I suppose there are different motives for pushing it too far. Maybe sometimes you really are obsessed that you forget to rest. And it'll kind of take a physical toll. But sometimes you take it too far because you think that's what people expect of you, and I think a lot of men can relate to that. Sometimes they probably feel under pressure, be it the social eye, or maybe you fear that you won't be looked at as well in your job. Maybe
expectation. Yeah. Do you think other people are expecting a certain thing? There's an expectation on you. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I do find CEOs quite fascinating, because they're very wealthy people, and even often wealthy people in general, wealthy business people. They're particularly, say, look at the very wealthy men. They're very, very wealthy. They've got pretty much everything, more money than they'll ever need. They could really take it easy, but they don't. Yeah, because presumably they love what they're doing, and if they do, that's fine. If they're doing it because they love it, even if it stresses them sometimes, I think that's good.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this what I'm about to say right now is very context sensitive, but
Mm.
my big advice to these sort of men is always mix business with pleasure. Just you know, take the time to enjoy other things
Yeah.
and do something passionate at the same time. Just if anything, mix them together. You know?
No, I think that's a good point. In fact, I saw a video on a Japanese businessman recently. I can't recall his name now, but I think he inherited his business from his father, and he just basically just poured his heart and soul into it. And he got to about sort of 45, and then he sold the business, and he had billions and billions of dollars. And he decided to just take it easy. But because he'd always worked so hard, he didn't really know how to take it easy. And before long, he was gambling and drinking, and he was actually impoverished by the time. I mean, he was losing millions of dollars, at the table every night. This sort of type of
Wow.
money, and he was impoverished by the. And in the
Yeah.
end, he actually needed some money. He needed money for a medical procedure, and had to try to do a GoFundMe or something. So,
Yeah.
absolutely extraordinary situation. I'll have to see if I can find his name, but. I think that was because he didn't have any fun earlier on, so he quite literally didn't know how to have fun, and he realized he needed to take a break from work, and then discovered that he didn't know how.
Exactly.
Which is,
Yeah.
yeah, quite sad.
Right. Yeah.
Mm,
Now, I want to address something that's popping immediately to mind. So,
mm,
I know what some of you are thinking. Some professions can't afford that. Like, there are some really low-paying jobs that you had to work an insane amount of hours for, right?
mm.
And I sympathize. I really do. But the thing is, this is why I think automation will be fantastic for them. It'll make the job, it'll lighten the burdens and give them better paying jobs. I think, maybe some people say that I'm oversimplifying things, but I think that's what we should look forward to. Like make these jobs better for them.
Well,
For those workers.
that's something that has been happening actually.
Well, it has
So,
been
and I think,
happening, but
anyway,
everybody's,
yeah,
but still, there are still people who work long hours for
yeah,
grotesquely small pay. But
agreed.
and that's the thing. Don't take what I'm trying to say here is that it is it's happening more. So let's recognize it and let's make it more so.
Yeah.
And what really makes me mad is people who complain about automation. That's
Mm.
your like jobs will be lost or something like that. Well,
Well, that's the Luddite fallacy right there.
Luddite fallacy. Yeah,
Yep, that's right. Which I think we have mentioned on a previous episode, didn't we? So
we have.
the
Yeah, yeah,
Ludd led a group, although some people have argued that maybe Ludd wasn't as involved, or maybe he wasn't the leader. But the belief is that he led a group who essentially went around smashing up machines in England during the Industrial Revolution because of the fear over the loss of jobs. And technology, since the Industrial Revolution, technology has not led to mass unemployment. It has led to different jobs, and in many cases, I dare say,
exactly.
better jobs.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so I've already written an article about this, but I want to throw a complete boulder into the notion that you know strong men make what are essentially bad time. I don't mean strong men like
Weak men,
you know what I mean, right? Like
yes,
strong
yes,
men create good times create weak men create bad times, and so forth.
yes.
Yeah, yeah, horse shit. But
Yeah,
but
I've never been a fan of it. I think it's over. At the very least, it's over. It's very simplistic, at the very
exactly,
least,
yeah.
if not
But
outright wrong.
sure, yeah. But when we're talking about the good times, what we really mean is like we have it much better. We have it much easier,
Mm,
and that's not, um, or at least it doesn't have to be, just us becoming weak and the society becoming bad as a result. No, it opens the way for society to be that much better in other areas. Like when
yes,
you lighten the load one way through technology, then that just means work opens up as a result in myriad ways.
yes. I'm reminded of a gentleman who I used to know who was an IT manager. This is going back about 20 years. And he told me, a little bit over, maybe 25 years, he told me he'd started his work life as a typesetter. He'd actually done an apprenticeship in typesetting. And of course, after about 10 years or something, or maybe less, that industry was disappearing and he transitioned over into IT and became an IT manager and so forth. So it's really just about being nimble and about being willing to retrain. And of course, the society should be ready to help people retrain as well. So make it easier for people. If as long as you're prepared to be nimble, I think the technology won't be a problem and might even end up with a better job.
Yeah.
I read an interesting. Oh, go on. Yeah.
No. Go ahead.
I read an interesting study recently. It's only fairly new, and I can't say I necessarily believe it, but the argument was that more complex societies actually require people to work more, which is an interesting argument. It was an attempt to explain why working hours haven't gone down since the Industrial Revolution. They have to some extent, but we're still working relatively long hours since the Industrial Revolution compared to, say, hunter-gatherers who actually work about 4 hours a day. So being a hunter-gatherer is, even today, when they're on marginal land, it's about 4 hours a day. So anyway, so he argued that it's actually to do with the complexity of society, which I think is an interesting argument. I'm not buying into it necessarily, but I think it's interesting that he's proposed this.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah.
So I don't know if you've got any further points on that, or I've got a related area that I wanted to mention, actually. I think it's been a perfect segue, if I could use that word.
Well, sure. Let's hear the segue first. All
right. So this is something I've an idea I've come up with just recently, and it's something that I'll be doing at A Voice for Men. So basically, what I'm encouraging men to do is, and obviously won't work for all men, but there are some men who are, we've seen, they're down on their luck. They're taking, as you say, minimum wage jobs and so forth. There are certain areas in IT where you don't have to spend a lot of money to learn these areas. You do have to spend a lot of time, so it's not an easy route. It requires dedication, but if you're prepared to spend the time doing it, and you've got, I guess, say, a decent memory to be able to absorb this information and so forth, there's the potential for men to retrain in IT in these areas. These areas, has been a huge demand for them for decades, and at the moment it's extreme because there's a shortage on. But at A Voice for Men, I'm actually going to be publishing some material along these lines and talking about areas that men can study. And obviously there's materials for everybody, but I'm focused on men in need and perhaps men who are needing to retrain and so forth. And they may be doing minimum wage jobs. They may be doing an Uber driver or something. And I'm saying, you know what, there's so much more you can do. And they may find the entire area inaccessible and difficult to understand what they need to do. So I'm going to present this information and say, this is something you could work on in your own time. I like to say the internet is self-documenting. So everything you need to understand how the internet functions is on the internet. Mm-hmm. So one example might be, areas like networking, where you can't go wrong understanding networking in IT. If you want any sort of IT job, understand networking, and you'll be head and shoulders above most of the other people going for the job. But something like Python programming, for example, you really can't go wrong in acquainting yourself with Python. So I want to give men tips on these sorts of areas that they can study. You don't have to spend a lot of money. Everything you need is pretty much free and open source software. It's available for Windows. You can run on Linux if you want, whatever. But you need to put in the time. So if you're a guy who's struggling on a minimum wage job, and you want to improve yourself and get a better income for your own benefit, I think that IT's got a lot to offer, and you don't have to spend a lot of money. Don't think that you need to enroll in expensive courses or anything like that. It's all there. Everything you need is there. You can download it all for free. You just have to put the time in. And I'm going to provide some pointers to areas, networking, Python, Linux, that sort of thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think there's a potential there for my fear is that looking for someone who has no specific IT experience and they may be online and so forth, but they don't know anything about IT per se, the whole thing may seem very inaccessible to them, or very complex, and they're not sure where to start. That's where I'll be talking to them. Start here, start there, start over there. Put the time in. Contribute to open source projects. You'll learn an enormous amount about how projects work, about how an individual developer slots into a project, and it helps in getting in landing that paid employment.
Awesome.
So that's a project you'll be seeing coming to A Voice for Men over the next few weeks. As we do have a couple, I am traveling a bit, so it'll probably have to wait until I finish traveling a little bit over the next few weeks to finally be able to move that forward. But it is coming.
Awesome.
So did you want to go back to the previous topic, or?
Yeah, we could. I mean, how much time do we have? How long have we been going for? Like close to an hour, right?
I think so. Exactly. I think you're probably right. Maybe even a little bit more. One problem with Zoom.
It's up to you. I can. This is the morning. My day is starting. So.
All right. No worries. I've got some other items, but they can probably wait for next time, actually, and that way, rather than rushing through them. One thing there was another application that I used to use for video for presentations before, and one nice feature it had was an on-screen counter to tell you how long the session was, and that's one thing Zoom doesn't have, and I think it's such a simple thing to implement. Yeah, in the top left or right hand corner, it should be telling us exactly how long the meeting was, and in actual fact, during ICMI 21 in particular, we were on a very tight time frame, as Vernon will remember. And as people managing the sessions, we really had to be on top of the time. And on-screen time, an on-screen counter would have been a godsend. So maybe we should suggest that as a Zoom feature.
Exactly. Yeah. All I'll say else is that I intend to write an article for A Voice for Men about the whole automation thing, like trying to make like a more expanded version of what I'm trying to talk about here. But I hope everybody gets what I'm trying to say here. Basically, masculine virtue is to make things, not only to attain things, but make things more attainable. Automation is our game.
Yes. I absolutely agree, and that comes across with all sorts of technologies and machinery that have been developed even going back hundreds of years, and probably even earlier than that. I mean, it's interesting when they talk about when was the first programming language, and depending on how you want to define a programming language, you can push the date back quite a long way.
Oh yeah.
In terms of spinning jennies to produce looms and all sorts of things. So to produce patterns in cloth and all sorts of things, they were programmable. Perhaps not with conditionals, but they were definitely programmable. So, depending on how far back you want to go, you can push it back quite a way. And I think perhaps, if we go back further, we'll probably find examples of automation being, I guess, even things like millstones and so forth. They're multipliers. They're force multipliers in the sense that one man can now crush a lot more grain than he could have done by hand.
The wheel was a classic example of automation.
Absolutely, it is.
Right.
That's
Machines
right.
are automation. Yes, like people.
That's right.
And people freak out about automation, and it just makes me want to rant for the next hour. So I should. So.
And I guess the final thing probably worth mentioning is Elizabeth Hobson will be joining us for an episode at some stage. So we'll have to
at some point we need to coordinate this.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. Yeah. It might be difficult. I'm traveling a bit, so we'll see how we go over the next few weeks. So, yeah. All right, wonderful. I think we've covered a lot of material. I've got a couple of items on my list that I think we'll hold over till next time. We can discuss in more depth.
Right. So by the next time, you would have finished your New Zealand conference, correct?
Exactly, that's right.
So you will have stuff to talk about then anyway.
Absolutely, that's right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. There's a bit of a story behind the New Zealand conference. I was first invited to present in New Zealand in 2020, and I was all set to go. And everything locked down, and I presented remotely in 2020, 2021, 2022, and here we are, and I'm finally making it.
All right, cool.
Yep, fulfilling the promise to attend in person that I made several years ago to
Yeah.
the New Zealanders.
I wonder if I'll ever make my first in-person conference at all.
I hope so. And who knows when? I mean, there'll be no doubt be a conference in an ICMI in North America before long, and if not, who knows? 2024 is in Hungary, so perhaps that might be an option.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I
2025
hope
is
to
in,
go even if I'm not presenting. So,
yep, and 2025 is in Australia. So
oh yeah,
who knows? Yep.
yeah. Well, that I'd like to make for sure.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. That's see what we can work out.
Yeah,
All right. Thank you very much. We'll talk to you in 2 weeks.
sounds good. Have fun.
Thanks. Bye.
Yeah,
You
bye.
too. Bye.